Deicide pushed baby sister's hand away from his face as the screen faded. He hoped by the time he arrived in his office, Nott would be in a better mood. Deicide began to form rebuttals for possible arguments she would throw at him. He enjoyed the mental sparring most times, but never on issues concerning combat or the treatment of hostile civilians. It was the one subject he felt his wife could never best him at. Her total battle experience might have involved a vicious pillow fight or two, but little else. What would she know of killing an enemy, watching the color drain out of his eyes, feeling his hot blood pooling around your knife and fist? No. Nott was a smart, pretty thing who knew nothing of cruelty and malice, only cold numbers and theory. "Tomorrow's still a day off?" baby sister said. Deicide nodded as he had 100 times that day to the same question. The advancement of instant widespread communication did nothing to change the military, still rife with rumor and hearsay, so the lowest still doubted the word of everyone but the commanding officer. "Oh, quarters is still the same time," Deicide said, jabbing her in the shoulder with the index finger. Baby sister scrunched her freckled nose. "Oh, what the hell? The only thing good about a day off is the sleeping in part," she said. "You can sleep in, just after you wake up normal time," Deicide said, making his way to the closest portal. Baby sister cupped her hands around her mouth. "Can I come in pajamas?" she said. Deicide turned back and yelled, "Ask Chief Commander Hellmouth," he said, knowing the hard-faced woman would slap anyone who approached her with such a silly request, even on her best days. Deicide had seen the woman belt Jaws for considerably less infractions, including his own. Adolescence was the harbinger of great disequilibration, and he was glad to be done with it. He plodded up the hill and slid through the fold in space and into the Yola pile. He shivered at the change in temperature. The decks of the Yola pile were cool and sterile, not like the muggy, stale atmosphere Earth had attained from years of poor maintenance. He wondered what sort of backwards government felt that they need not hold mastery over the elements. A loud voice sounded from the 1MC speaker. "Yolapile, returning." It signaled that Deicide was on board. The ship possessed technology that allowed it to fold space multiple times over. Thousands of quarterdecks all over the ship were receiving and processing each individual, from the smaller ships situated at Earth. Petty officers of the Watch, corpsmen, and supply department personnel were just the beginning of the pipeline. The masses were briefed, documented, immunized, and given rations and clothing for their next monotonous 36 hours, which equaled a full day on board the Yolapile. Over the next few months, stringent testing would be done to separate future citizens from the rest of the chaff. Those who held worthy positions of power were given special privileges once they entered the districts. For some, mainly politicians, shrewd business people, and those with a higher degree of skill in any field, little changed but the scenery outdoors. Deicide passed a loudspeaker that was spewing garbled noise from his wife's language program. It was a sort of command speak, which all sentient beings could understand, a guttural drone that rooted itself in the inner workings of the mind, like the crying baby or the beat of a drum. It explained to the refugees the situation and gave them instructions on how to handle their new living arrangements. Deicide nosed around the in-briefing desks, waved to a few corpsmen, and slapped the backs of a few petty officers before continuing onward. He was extremely well loved by the military, crew members, and privileged citizens of the Yolapile. He set aside time to eat at least one meal a day in an enlisted mess hall, of which there were thousands, and made sure he was seen throughout the ship with daily walks and friendly, non-inspection visits through each department. Abruptly, the voice of Hellmouth, his risk-eater chief commander, a grade 3 eater, came from behind him. With it being so early in the day, he knew her to be wearing her warm-up suit, with the empty skid underneath, mildly transparent from the lack of black vestige running through it. "Ask me what, Aunt?" she said. The gold-toothed woman was very direct with junior officers, to enlisted personnel, and even Deicide. Besides his wife, she was the only one who would call him by his nickname consistently in public. The diminutive of his birth name did not bother him, especially when he was told what an ant was. He was proud to be linked to a creature that could lift more than 10 times its weight. Quickly remembering what he had said to baby sister earlier, Deicide answered. "Nothing," he said, quickening his pace. "You gonna PT tomorrow?" she said, catching up to him. "It's holiday routine, Shay," he said, not wanting to be lectured on the evils of sedentary lifestyles. And if you don't train, everyone else is going to think they can slack off, she said. You can still work out your people, Deicide said. He glanced over his shoulder and waved to a group of young eaters that had immediately stopped goofing off, not at his presence, but that of Hellmouth's. For their sake, he hoped she would forget their faces, but not likely. Hellmouth continued to speak of transgressions made in Deicide's youth, as if they had happened only a week before. Deicide stepped onto an express-moving walkway and hopped up onto the railing, an act forbidden to everyone on board for safety reasons. Deicide watched as Hellmouth's thick lips tightened as he made himself comfortable on the rail. Then he glanced over the side and through the transparent decks of the plaza. The interior architecture of the Yolopai was a marvel of design and technological advancement, as well as aesthetically pleasing. The insides appeared to be completely seamless and sleek. Swooping white arches of amazing curvature never seemed to find angles or sharp corners. Reflective surfaces always maintain a mirror finish, and glass, or some substance much like it, was polished until it was virtually undetectable to unassisted eyes. Items, such as emergency procedures, directions, and bullseye markers, only appeared in the event of an actual emergency, or the prompting of a resident without optical nanomachine implants. If a member of the crew or passengers fell under any sort of duress, or most likely a state of bewilderment, the machines monitoring their functions would automatically lead them in the right direction to safety with neon guidelines along the walls, floors, and ceilings. Hellmouth cleared her throat to capture Deicide's attention. We've talked about this before, Aunt, Hellmouth said. And they had, at length, but Deicide felt that after living more than a few thousand years, he was a man now, even if Hellmouth would never think so. Shay, refusing to work out on my day off isn't a political statement, Deicide said. I'm not telling you how to run your department. And I'm not telling you how to run your ship, but they follow your lead, don't they? She said, jutting her thumb back to the group of loitering eaters, laughing in a semicircle. Deicide shrugged. An eater soldier was only expected to be fearless and unmerciful in battle. He cared little of what soldiers did in their personal time. They owned it, unlike non-eaters that were kept busy every moment of the 12-hour workday. If the eaters were the lions, then the non-eaters were the hyenas, jealously waiting for their turn to enter the brutal examination period. And how about your little speech before the earth jump? Hellmouth said. Deicide said, glancing at a violet-headed eater behind them on the walkway. I don't think females appreciate being called girls, Hellmouth said. I've heard they don't appreciate being called females, Deicide said, speaking more to the woman behind them than Hellmouth, a person he felt had strong-armed more than enough attention over his unnaturally long lifespan. Rather be called a female than a fucking girl, Hellmouth said, shooting a discouraging glance at the violet adjacent to them. And she knew full well the type of women that Deicide was weakened by. A subtle nod from Hellmouth as she glanced at the top of the woman's left breast. She had memorized the name on her tape. You know I didn't mean it like that. Looking back to Hellmouth. And I remember saying girls and boys. I was trying to play the friendly father figure, Deicide said. From the youngest face wearing the heaviest brass, she said. Deicide let out a small chuckle. Genetics. You should have Knock do some work on you. I hear it's cheap, Deicide said. Tempting, but I don't want to live forever, sweetie. You'd have your answer about God much quicker if you didn't, Hellmouth said. The mission. I don't want to die before I've seen the end of this, Deicide said. Sometimes I think it's the only thing you see, Hellmouth said. Deicide turned his gaze away from her. She pinched his cheek and then hopped over the railing onto an adjacent walkway heading in the opposite direction. The violet had ceased beckoning with her matching eyes. Now specifically forbidden from interacting with her captain in any formal setting, she turned away and found an interesting section on the sleeve of her uniform. Deicide thought of penning a convincing appeal and sending it to his wife Not. She was pretty enough, and being an eater, she obviously had superior genetics. But it was never wise to sneak around the backs of the women that truly cared for his well-being and safety, even if that love was sometimes stifling and a bit possessive. Deicide slid from the railing as the end of the walkway came closer. Soon after doing so, he was accosted by crew members and Yolopao citizens, all needing things, all talking at once. It was why his personal staff of risk eaters and deathless troops usually accompanied him, even on the ship sometimes in the civilian sector. Though some of their notoriety was just as bad. Some of the more dashing risk eaters were constantly mauled any time they strode in public areas. Deicide waved them away politely, while the abyss narrowed her giant yellow eyes that swam in her unending blackness. All it would take is a thought from Deicide for the abyss to spear them all into the air like a demented black menorah. As captain, Deicide always had to hide the fact that he was a brooding misanthrope. He loved the company of his entourage, degenerates that they were. They understood his moods and knew when he was prone to his fits of anger and melancholy. In the most extreme of either emotion, Deicide was known to barricade himself in his estate with frightened socialites or unlucky officers, practically holding them hostage with the abyss. As Knott had written in her notes long ago, that the abyss was a cannon always loaded and forever pointed at everyone and everything except for the boy she coveted. Deicide came before a row of gates. They were similar to the portals he had used to enter the ship, but these were permanent, unlike the dynamic gates, and could not be modified without a technician. It allowed quick access between decks like an elevator, without the trifles of buttons, doors, or close-quarters flatulence. They were only located on certain regions of the ship to allow quick access to forward, aft, and amidship spaces. Instantly, Deicide passed through the warp in reality and was inside the officers' plaza, commonly referred to as O Country. It housed the living spaces and common areas of all officers on board, as well as their families. These were no modest staterooms to which even the lowliest unmarried enlisted man was accustomed to. These were luxury condominiums, fit for the highborn and dignitaries.